with tonight's top stories. And tonight, folks, we have naughty kittens pushing glasses off of tables, social experiments gone wrong. But first, our top story of the evening: deaf culture in America. In America today, 0.38% of our population is labeled as clinically deaf. That puts this count just over 1 million people. And this previously quiet minority is now raising a voice in our culture. Now passing it on to my colleague.
Thank you, Stephen. Hello, everybody. My name is Adrina. I'm here today to talk about communication barriers noticed in the deaf society. It is first seen through deaf children that they struggle with communicating much longer than children who are born able to hear. As all children do when they start school, they are taught the alphabet, how to read and write. And not only do deaf children have to do this, they also have to learn sign language at the same time. And we all know that written English is built on the spoken word, and that reading, writing, comprehension all involve an advanced language focus. Children who only learn sign language have a lot of trouble understanding people outside of the deaf society. This makes them feel different, not a part of the group. Some are taunted and criticized, and they often fall into a strange anxiety phase. I have read in the Godlet Research Institute in Washington, D.C., they had tested a group of students around the ages of 17 through 18 years old in reading comprehension skills. The results were the same as students that were 8 to 9 years old in the 4th grade that could hear. It is very hard to see how much deaf children struggle every day, and most of the time the help is very mediocre, or they're too scared to ask for help because they don't want to seem weird or a pain. A lot of deaf students also give up after high school because of the lack of support and guidance they had during the years in school, so they give up their dreams. And now on the impact that these barriers have on members of the deaf society and on outsiders. If a person that can hear is not familiar with American Sign Language, then the communication between them and someone who is deaf is very limited to pretty much writing notes and making nonverbal gestures. If deaf culture attitudes create skepticism in the deaf community, that person will try to avoid any communication with someone who can hear. It might make them feel stupid or awkward. On the other hand, if the deaf community did not create that barrier and they all feel more comfortable, they would feel more inclined to speak to everyone, deaf and not. Then the communication choices would come from balancing what is preferred by the speaker and what is possible. Lip reading has been a way of communication of deaf people to hearing people also. Not very effective, but does help a lot. Some can decipher a whole conversation by lip reading, which is completely amazing. Learning to lip read a language which one cannot hear clearly and which one does not have previous knowledge of is almost impossible. Many things like the age at the beginning of deafness, individual differences in lip reading abilities, and many more can limit one's achievement at learning how to lip read with others. There are no barriers between the deaf community when interacting with one another. They do not need an interpreter. This lets great opportunities to create leadership, great social skills, and it helps build up their self-esteem. It's all about deaf children socializing together, playing sports, studying, and learning new things together. With deaf people, they do not need to avoid a communication with one another. In fact, deaf people communicate very openly and blunt with one another. Thank you for your time, and now let's pass this to Julia.
For deaf people, it's a little bit different because they have to relearn how to speak kind of twice. First, they have to learn how to speak to other people that know sign language, so they have to learn sign language to be able to obviously communicate. But also, they have to learn how to communicate with people who don't know sign language, like someone like me. I don't know sign language, and I know that there are a lot of people in this world that don't know sign language. So they have to kind of learn and adapt to how to communicate with someone like that. I work at Tijuana Flats, and I'm a waitress, so I take orders, I deliver food, and I clear tables and stuff, like a waitress. And there's a deaf lady that comes in very often. And the first time she came in, I didn't realize that she was deaf until she picked up the menu and started pointing to her order. And I knew that there was no way that that was going to work very well or be very efficient for her nor me. Like, it would have just taken forever. And so I came up with a way that she could have ordered a little bit easier for her and for me. So I printed out a piece of paper, like a piece of receipt paper, and I gave her a pen and a paper. And so she wrote down her order on the pen and the paper, and then she gave it back to me, and I tried to read her handwriting as best I could. But I put her order into the computer, and then I wrote down the total, and I showed her the total on the piece of paper, and she gave me her credit card, and I swiped it, and she was on her way. So that is something that I had to kind of not deal with, because you don't have to deal with people like that, but it was something that I had to come across, like overcome almost. I had to think about a way that she could have ordered that was effective for both me and her. Me being the person that didn't know sign language, and her being the deaf one that maybe didn't want to speak or has never spoken before at all. Which brings me to my next point, that deaf people don't really even talk, even though they can talk. They have a voice box. Nothing is wrong with their tongues. They're just afraid to talk, or they are ashamed almost, maybe some of them might be, of their voice because they've never actually heard it. So for them to speak without even hearing what they sound like might turn me off from speaking a little bit too. We all hear our voices every single word we say, and that's something that I think we also forget. But deaf people have had to learn 2 different ways to communicate with 2 different types of people, and they also have to deal with the fact that they can't hear themselves speak, which is a big part of communication, obviously, speaking.
In America today, members of deaf and hearing impaired culture seek to overcome the many obstacles that are met on a daily basis. In the face of those challenges have come vast arrays of solutions that serve as a means of adapting to a world without sound. The evolution of technology has allowed those whom have endured hearing loss the chance to conquer some of the issues, such as cochlear implants, which are a tiny machine inserted into the cochlea and fires electric bursts that assist the ear in receiving sounds. It's worn like this. An alternative example is the services available to those with deafness that allow them the opportunity to engage in instances of group conversation, such as transcribers and translators of American Sign Language. Also, the communicative challenges that members of the deaf and hearing impaired culture face when looking for a boyfriend or girlfriend have been diminished by the invention of dating sites created specifically for these members of our society. The most common misconception is observed about members of the deaf and hearing impaired culture is the idea that these people are handicapped or crippled and need an extensive amount of care or attention. Outsiders of the culture have adapted by becoming a part of the solution by doing things like learning and or teaching sign language. The best resolution to overcoming these cultural barriers is to have an open flow of communication and to embody a sense of understanding for the needs of one another. At the rate that technology is advancing, I believe that we will be able to have resolved many of the issues that we face daily within the next decade or so.